Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to Win TV today. Our publisher, Denise Rollart Barnes, has been in Egypt for the past 2 weeks, and we hope when she returns, she'll share some of the highlights of her trip when she's back with us again. We can't wait to hear about it. In the meantime, I'm your host. I'm the senior editor for the Washington Informer, D. Kevin McNair. I hope you've had a chance to pick up this week's issue of the Washington Informer. The cover is on the screen now. Great photos, great stories. And if you haven't picked up a copy, you can read it online at www.washingtoninformer.com. Remember, we want you to tell a friend about us. Share this broadcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram and our newest platform, TikTok. And subscribe to our YouTube channel at Washington Informer TV. After Win TV, we will be bringing Bridge TV with the media prints and the sounds of the DMV. Although it's Friday, our reporters are already out in the field working on stories for next week. I've got to look at my little cheat sheet here, but I'm going to tell you one of the things that we're going to be talking about is the soaring cost of gasoline. Many of us have been traveling and spending a lot more money this year for gasoline in our travels. Another story that may be of interest is the first or the second time that Congress has proposed a bill that would make Puerto Rico one of our states. Could be that we have two states coming in. The 51st, that is here in D.C., and the 52nd, several miles away in Puerto Rico. Stay tuned. Also, something that should be a lot of fun, Wards 7 and 8 Democrats are going to square off in a kickball classic. Now, I don't know about you, but, as a child, we all played kickball. This ought to be a lot of fun. Let's see how these guys go up to the plate and kick that ball for victory. We'll see how that works out. And also, one of our reporters, our Prince George's County reporter, William J. Ford, is out in the field today shadowing Vice President Kamala Harris at the NACO conference at the Gaylord. Natalie Huckaday is also working on a story related to food insecurity. The Well will be opening its urban farm next week, and she'll be bringing us highlights in the next edition of the Washington Informer. Finally, I have to say that on tomorrow, Saturday, I will have the opportunity to spend some time with Sugar Bear and EU as they begin their month-long celebration that will mark the 50th anniversary of one of the most spectacular go-go bands we've ever heard. Can't wait to tell you about that. And also, I'm going to have some fun next week. I'll be playing a little putt-putt down in DuPont Circle. Some of you may have read our stories, a little hot topic that talked about what they're doing there. They're playing putt-putt, having some few drinks, and getting some sun. So I'll be doing my putt-putt thing, and hopefully a couple of you may join me. It's been a wonderful time this year, and I want to tell you, today we're going to share a conversation with our Prince George's County editor, who I mentioned earlier, William J. Ford, that he had with Maryland gubernatorial candidate Ashwani Jain. William did a story this week on most of the candidates, and will be bringing them each on Win TV in the coming weeks, either live or pre-recorded. I must give a shout to my reporter, William, who did a fantastic job. The story dropped at the exact same time as one of the competitors in our area. Good job, William. Before Denise left the country, she spoke with the Reverend Jeffrey Brown, the founder of Rebuilding Every Community Around Peace, about gun violence in our communities. Reverend Brown hosted a virtual conference, the 2021 Season of Peace, that took place last week, and brought together clergy, street workers, and community leaders from across the country to share their experiences, best practices, and common challenges facing those engaged in direct action to reduce violence across the nation. We will hear Reverend Brown's efforts. We'll also share previously recorded dialogues that we had with Ward 8 Council Member Trayon White and community organizer Tony Lewis Jr., both on gun violence. Now, before we begin the conversations, Let's watch our weekly news broadcast by Washington Informer reporter Curtis Knowles.
This is WIN TV News, bringing you the news that matters. The pandemic has had a severe effect on the educational aspects of Maryland. One potential reason for this is that Maryland students had the second least amount of access to in-person learning during the pandemic. Only 2.3% of students had access. Hawaii was the only state with a worse percentage at 1.3%. The wariness of educators and parents is a possible reason as to why these numbers were so low. The coronavirus pandemic refuses to loosen its grip on the world, with a new strain of the virus making the rounds. The Delta variant now accounts for 51% of new coronavirus infections in the U.S., according to the CDC. Dr. Fauci has given new information on the strain, saying that the Delta variant is both more transferable and can cause a more severe disease reaction. The historic Marriott Wardman Park Hotel is set to be auctioned on July 20th. Residents of Ward 3 and the city of D.C. are debating about what should be done with the property. The Wardman Hotel strategy team is requesting the district government to buy the site for mixed-income affordable housing. The site also contains a bevy of Black history, as major figures such as Langston Hughes and Thurgood Marshall have graced its halls. John Falsiccio, the district's deputy mayor, has stated that the city is not going to engage into a bidding war. In world news, the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moïse, was assassinated on Tuesday. Moïse's wife, Martine, was also injured in the assault and was airlifted to a hospital in southern Florida on Wednesday. Opponents of the Haitian government have been demanding for Moïse's resignation for months. He has held the position of president for 5 years and refused to hold elections. The Haitian Prime Minister, Claude Joseph, has stated the country's security situation is under control of the National Police of Haiti and the Armed Forces of Haiti. The U.S. is still currently assessing the situation. This is Curtis Knowles with WIN TV News.
Before we turn it over to our pre-recorded segment, I want to say thank you for joining us today, and be sure to stay with us for the media prints and the sounds of the DMV. And before we go, let me give you 3 things. One, the Scripps National Spelling Bee had its second African-American winner in its over 90-year history. We want to give a shout out to the young lady from Harvey, Louisiana, and a young lady who just completed the 8th grade for doing a stellar job. Second, as you heard Curtis mention, a lot of things are happening in Haiti, and we want to keep them both in our prayers and our thoughts. Those who live in Haiti and those who are part of the Haitian diaspora. My phone's been ringing off the hook talking to friends from Miami and other cities like New York, where there are a lot of Haitians, as well as here in the district. Finally, I recommend that if you have not checked out The Summer of Spirit by Questlove, that you take a look at it. It's currently on Hulu, I believe. I watched it several times already this week. And here's the question, as Arsenio Hall used to say, things that make you say, You have to wonder why this film was placed on the back burner for 50 years. Meanwhile, Woodstock got all of the praise and the attention. If you look at this film and you look at the work that Questlove did, it's going to make you wonder why Black conversations are often sequestered, hidden, put on the back burner, or in this case, just put in the basement where the files and the films just collected dust. It's a great piece. You will love it. Now, let's hear from William Ford and Maryland gubernatorial candidate Ashwani Jain, followed by Denise, the Reverend Brown, Councilmember Trayon White, and Tony Lewis Jr. And I've been asked to say one more thing, and that is one of our editorials this week talked about gun violence. Now, it was the 4th of July several days ago, and everyone celebrated and fireworks and all those kinds of things, and parks opened up, and we sang all these wonderful songs about liberty, justice, and the American way. But a lot of people went off and shot off their guns. A lot of violence occurred. In fact, over 500 shootings nationwide. And here in the district, we just recorded our 99th homicide. I don't know about you, but it's been a long time since Congress started talking about gun control and more serious legislation. This is not the Wild Wild West, folks. Let's put the guns away. It's time for some peace, not war. With that, let's go to our pre-recorded segments.
What are a few things you see Maryland could do better with in terms of healthcare?
A lot. For me as a cancer survivor, the issue of healthcare is super important. I've also helped organize students in every county in this state in 2009 and 2010 to get the Affordable Care Act passed. Years later, I served at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services as then Health Secretary's lead representative and liaison to all of our medical associations around the country to increase signups on the Obamacare marketplace. And so those are some of the perspectives that I bring. And specifically in terms of how we can improve the system, all the details to each of my policy proposals are all on my website, janeforgovernor.com. But I also do it all in the context of a relief, recovery, reform agenda. So details, when I talk about relief, I talk about expanding access by creating new health enterprise zones around the state. I talk about reproductive justice, specifically making sure that healthcare providers are not allowed or provided state funds if they refuse essential healthcare services like abortion care or gender-affirming hormone replacement therapy. I talk about easing medical debt and creating a caregivers program, and also making sure that Maryland finally has guaranteed paid family and medical leave. I talk about investing more in mental health. I talk about reducing the cost of prescription drugs and also making sure we have cleaner drinking water, especially on the Eastern Shore. So these are just some of the issues. It's looking at it in a very comprehensive way. And again, I've gone through full details in terms of how I plan to pay for each of these issues and how I plan to accomplish them in the short term and long term, all on my website.
There was one particular statewide topic from an educational perspective, which is still being discussed, and that's regarding school resource officers, AKA cops in schools. Just summarize, what are your thoughts on having police officers, which some are armed, in the schools?
So I fully support eliminating the school resource officer program in all of our public schools. Plain and simple, schools should not feel like prison. And so instead, what I'm advocating for is investing and replacing those with more social workers and guidance counselors. What we've also found, at least at a nationwide level, is the SRO programs have not really proven to actually reduce crime or increase security. Instead, they've actually had more of a racial inequity, all right? Because more than 80% of the students that have been arrested by SROs are Black and Latino students. And so this idea of sustainable improvement by simply arresting students or giving them the appearance that you're going to be in trouble if you try to seek help, you're not really setting them up for success or for a life outside of the criminal justice system. And there have been reports that prove this, and I think there are better use of our funds that we can have. So far, I have committed to have my campaign be run 100% virtual until the fall. And then after the fall, then we're going to do half virtual and half in person, again, assuming that things continue to remain safe. But yeah, we have people working on policy development, policy research, campaign strategies. We're going to be having canvases and phone banks as well. But full details can be found on my website, janeforgovernor.com, on the Get Involved tab. And anyone who decides to volunteer for my campaign, I also make time to have a one-on-one conversation so we can personalize the volunteer experience for you.
And finally, sir, what makes you so different? What makes you the reason why Maryland voters should support you?
I think because I not only understand how to create policy, but more importantly, have the perspective and empathy to enforce policies in an equitable way. For almost 2 decades, I've advocated for policy at all levels of government and all across the state, including in leadership roles with then President Obama and then Vice President Biden. But most importantly, as a product of Maryland public schools, as a son of immigrants and small business owners, and as someone who has dealt with both physical and mental health issues, including cancer, abuse, divorce, and death, I believe I understand exactly what it feels like to be written off and have other people make decisions for me instead of with me. And that's why I'm running the kind of inclusive campaign I am. And that's also why I have details and inclusive policies already on my website. And so I think that is what residents can connect with, can relate to. And I think that will not only make me a better candidate, but also a better governor if I have the honor of being elected.
Well, thanks a lot, William. That was outstanding work as always. Before we move on to the remainder of our pre-recorded conversations, and then to the Win TV Bridge segment. On behalf of our publisher, Denise Rollart Barnes, our fantastic staff of writers and photographers, my name is D. Kevin McNair. I'm the senior editor, and I want to thank you for joining us today, as always, for Win TV. You're great. Subscribe, support us. If Black Lives Matter, invite us into your home, into your hearts. Thanks so much. Peace and love.
In Washington, D.C. is.
Oh. What did I do?
Violence in Washington, D.C. is at an all-time high, particularly gun violence. And it's not only happening here in the nation's capital, but it's happening all across the country. And it's my honor, actually, to bring to Win TV Reverend Jeffrey Brown with My City at Peace in Boston, Massachusetts, who is about to host a conference, but also is finding ways to deal with violence in our communities, particularly in our Black and Brown communities. So, Reverend Brown, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us. Pleasure to be here.
So, first of all, tell me, what is My City at Peace?
So My City at Peace is an organization that I started in 2015. It continues the work that I've been doing for the past 30 years, and that is going into cities and training faith leaders and community leaders around anti-violence strategies in collaboration with the community organizations and city organizations. Because I believe that the collaborative approach to violence that puts the youth at the center is the only way that we're going to be able to get through the waves of violence that occur in our community. The other part of My City of Peace is a housing piece where I'm advocating for wealth building strategies for communities, because violence is always cyclical. And part of the reason why it's cyclical is because of the weakened social structures that are within the African American community due to the oppression that we have dealt with for hundreds of years. And so one indicator that breaks the cycle of violence is the health of the community's economic structure. And so part of that is housing, and it's not just affordable housing, but it's about home ownership, giving people the opportunity to build wealth and to care for their communities in a much stronger way. So we do both of those things in that organization.
So I'm curious about what is it in your background. I know you're a pastor or a reverend. I'm not sure if do you pastor a church as well?
Yeah, I'm a part of 12th Baptist Church in the Roxbury section of Boston, and I've pastored churches for over 20 years.
And so what have you been seeing in your community that might reflect what many of us are seeing right now? And maybe if there's some relationship to COVID or this pandemic, but what is it that you've observed and you're trying to address that so many of us are observing at this point in time?
Yeah, good question. What I have observed in Boston and in other cities that I've worked with over the years is that the COVID crisis has really brought to sharp relief the problems, the systemic problems that we have in our community that morphs into violence. You know, violence does not happen in a vacuum. It happens when our social, political, and economic structures are weakened to the point where a phenomenon of cultural violence would emerge. So, and what's happening with COVID is that it's clear that it affects communities of color in a much more dire way than it does the rest of the communities. You've had folks who've been inside, largely for the past year, and now as things are starting to emerge from the pandemic, you've got folks coming outside, you have old beefs that are rising up, and a lot of the violence that we see in our community is not necessarily gang motivated, but you've got a lot of interpersonal situations that sort of explode into violence. And when you have a proliferation of guns and folks with a lot of time on their hands, these kinds of things happen. And so you see a lot of that happening in communities around the country.
Well, I know you have your explanation. I'm going to throw one in there that I keep thinking, and I want to get your reaction to this, and then we're going to talk about the conference. But, I think I would add one more thing to that, and that's hunger. And people always talk about, when people are angry and hungry, they're hangry. And hangry people, are irritable. And it makes them do things that I guess respond to people in angry ways. But in our communities, because of food deserts and the lack of quality food, and the fact that we really aren't cooking anymore, we're raising our kids on fast foods, that may be having an impact on the overall mental and physical health of our communities. So that's Denise's theory. What does Reverend Brown have to say about that?
I think Denise's theory, your theory, runs right into what I've been saying. When we talk about issues around hunger and issues around poverty, they're clearly a factor in all of that. And one of the fears that I always have in summertimes is that you have a lot of youth and young people, and sometimes the only really good meals that they get are when they're in school and, school lunch programs. And in the summertime, if they're not going to summer school, then they're not getting the food that they were normally getting throughout the school year. So that's always a concern. I think all of these factors, it's not just one particular factor. So it's not just housing, or it's not just education, or it's not just healthcare. It's all of these things working in concert with one another that creates, the conditions for the violence that we see in our communities.
So your response is a conference that's coming up soon called the Season of Peace Conference. I know by the time this show airs, it would have taken place already, so I won't be able to ask you, your reaction to how it went. But we can still talk about what folks would have experienced if they had a chance to participate, and also why, what this conference is going to address.
This conference is the Season of Peace Conference is an attempt on my part to bring people together from across the country who see things similarly to how I've seen them over the years. And I'm talking about clergy, community leaders who have been engaged in the work of youth violence reduction, from their pulpits, but not only from their pulpits, they've come out of the four walls of their sanctuaries and walked the streets and built relationships with youth. And those groups are emerging all across the country. And we're in a new summer, and we've got challenges, and each summer has its challenges. So we try to bring people together to talk about, what the latest programming, the latest ministries, and what are they addressing. And we talk about issues around police community relationships and, what can we do around police reform. And we're also talking about policy issues, about how policies within a particular city can change, and where we can get more financial resources, for example, to be poured into these collaborative efforts to reduce violence. And so, there'll be anywhere between 150 to 200 practitioners. There's some academics that'll be a part of it. There'll be policy folks, government people who will be a part of it, but largely community leaders and faith leaders coming together to talk about these issues.
So one of the concerns I have, and like I said, we're here in the nation's capital, and many times, and we're on Martin Luther King Avenue. That might tell you something about where we're located, right? And so either I can go down the street or in the opposite direction and see corners full, particularly of young Black men, sometimes women, sometimes men, women, and small children,
Yes.
But this is their parking lot. This is where they come every day with their chairs, their bottles, and normally not music, but one of the other two. And they're out there, most of the day. You're all going to have a conference in Boston, maybe in a nice church, nice hotel. How do those practitioners and ministers and educators, how does that message get to those street corners, to those young men and women who are out there? How do we get the message to them, whatever that message may be? And what is that message?
So the Season of Peace Conference is designed to equip community and faith leaders to emerge from their sanctuaries and places of worship and to engage youth where they are. No longer trying to find creative ways to bring people into the church, but we got to turn the church inside out and bring the church to them. And so it's the how to do that folks need help with. And so this is what we've been doing for many years. When I was in Chicago, for example, in a project, I'll never forget the young man who I was talking with. He was one of the leaders of a particular gang on the West Side. And I said to him, we're trying to, find resources for, your situation. What would you want? What would you have for us to do? And he looked me straight in the eye and he says, I need for you to be out here with me. He said, I need for you to come out. He said, just be positive and talk positively to me. And, and if I'm making a move, just be aware of it, and encourage me. And if you can help me, that's fine. But if you just get to know who I am, he said, that's going to be a whole lot. And so, that's one of the things that those of us who've been doing this a long time understand to be the key, in terms of engaging. Law enforcement doesn't do anything like that, right? It's really up to community leaders and faith leaders like myself to do that level of engagement, to find out what the streets are like. Many of the clergy, when they preach about it in their pulpits, if have not been engaged in the streets, or have not been engaged lately. There may be some who came out of it and they'll talk about that experience, but it's really about what are we doing today? What are we doing right now? And this is not about proselytization. So this is not about, getting a tract and putting it in somebody's hand and say, do you know Jesus? This is really about building relationships and understanding that the church has to behave differently if we really want to see the change that we pray for.
And how do you address the issue of funding for many of these church programs? I've observed are government funded. Mm-hmm. The government has a grant, church applies for the grant, gets the money, they do a few programs, grant money's gone, program ends. Mm-hmm. So how do you sustain programs that actually continue to impact the community?
So, there is, of course, when we talk about sustaining programs and funding, one of the things that I always say is that if you engage in the ministry, then the money, is destined to come your way. There are always folks who will say, I really want to do this work, but I need the money first in order to get it done. But, I found that if you really inspire faith leaders to see this as a central part of their mission or the central part of their ministries, then there'll be some form of it that will be sustained regardless of whether you have money or not. And you'll have churches, for example, using the funding from their congregations in order to fund that work. And when communities and cities see this kind of work in engagement, they, through their politicians, their city councilors or the elders or whatever they call them, will come to the fore and talk about ways in which we should fund. This year, we've got an enormous opportunity federally through the Biden administration. In the infrastructure package that he put together, there are a number of areas even in the budget for this year, where they are looking to fund community-based strategies that are evidence-based, that are effective in violence prevention and intervention. And so this is an enormous opportunity for those who are already engaged in this work to expand the programming, because the real problem, I believe, is scale. We don't have enough people doing this in enough communities in a city in order for this to be, effective. Either you have to have super inspiration, or you have some other type of act of God in order for it to happen. But it really is about boots on the ground and getting enough boots on the ground to engage in this work so that we can actually see measurable success.
The council member of the District of Columbia for Ward 8, and that's Council Member Trayon White. Councilmember White, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. We left the T off your name, but we apologize for that, and hopefully we'll get that fixed. But anyway, first of all, any reflections did you have on John Lewis? Did you ever get a chance to meet him?
Yes, actually I did. It was around the time where Trayvon Martin was killed. They had a hearing on the Hill, and I was joined there with a couple of my friends to shock us, some of the young men in the community I mentor. And I have a picture, actually, when he passed. I posted that picture on my social media, me, him, and a young man named Timothy Dawkins, who also passed, who was a victim of gun violence here in D.C.
Was there anything about his life that inspired you?
Consistency. I think that he started his work in the community on the civil rights movement. And we're talking about now in 2020, he was still fighting against the social inequalities and for social justice, using this platform as a congressman, unafraid, unapologetic about fighting for people, most specifically Black people. And so I always saw that in him. He was in a couple of movies too, so I followed his career. So consistency, just staying at it, because you can't conquer anything that you're not committed to.
But this has been a tough year for everybody, but particularly for the ward. And I know that you're right in the midst of it. We've dealt with the issue of COVID-19. I think you lost your grandmother.
Yes.
To COVID. And so let's talk a little bit about that, because Ward 8 and East of the River have really been considered not necessarily the ground zero for those who have gotten the disease, but it has been for those who have died from the disease. What have you been doing, or how have you all been able to address that?
First, I want to send my love and condolences for those who have been affected by the COVID-19 virus here in DC and across the world. Because when the virus first was here, I guess in China, the notion was Black people can't catch it, young people can't catch it, males can't catch it, and then we found out that those narratives are truly not true. And so one of the things we've done is ramped up our testing sites, because I don't know if you remember, but at first the numbers were high all across the city, but in Ward 8 we only had 48.
Right.
And they asked me, actually Sam Ford asked me about that in an interview, and I said it's only because people haven't got tested yet. And because we have a lot of pre-existing conditions, but the health disparities here in Ward 8, 7, Ward 5, other parts of the city, I knew that we'll be hit hard. I didn't know like we have been to that magnitude, but I knew that it was something that was missing. And so when we did put a location at United Medical Center, we moved one to the fire station, a testing site on Atlantic Street, also one on MLK by the big chair. And we just been trying to utilize the government resource to cushion the blow, because there still haven't been a solution. And we've seen spikes arise again in the last couple of days. We also working with United Medical Center today because the patients there are going through some turmoil with the heat and outages as well. So it's been a constant battle each and every day here in the ward.
It sounds like it. And then, of course, all across the country, thank God we're not Chicago, but we've seen an uptick in violence across the country, particularly in communities like ours. And while you've been in the midst of trying to work against that, what do you see as the problem, and how do you think not only your office, but the whole community can help to address what's happening?
Thank you. We've seen a few homicides in the last week that's been tragic, partly because they were young people. We had the young lady Joe, the young boy, 11 years old, Davon, Antoine, who was killed on MLK in Parkchester. Just a number of shootings. We had one yesterday. And so I think there's a direct correlation in the city between poverty and violence. And I think that there's some underlying things we haven't addressed in this city that's really fundamental. One is education. The gap for Black and African-American boys in Washington, D.C. has been widening at least for the last 7 years. We talk about in Ward 8, there's the highest concentration of youth anywhere in D.C. has lost over 10 recreation centers in the last 10 years. And I talk about it a lot, from Hot Rec, Old Rec, Ketchum Rec, Anacostia Rec, Baloo Rec, number 11 Boys and Girls Club. And so what we've been doing is trying to figure out what has worked, looking at other things that should work, and trying to put some things in place. But we got to be mindful that resources for violence intervention has been missing for at least 7 years in D.C. You was around when we had a lot of organizations from Eastern River working with Reverend Isaac, the Peaceaholics, Alliance for Concerned Men, Ceasefire on Smoking Brothers and Sisters. And for the last 7-8 years, all these organizations have been dormant, and resources have been removed. And we wonder why the crime is high, and why we had 36 kids shot east of Anacostia River last year, and kids killed. We had a 2-year-old, was it a 2-year-old girl, a 3-year-old girl, and her mother shot two nights ago uptown.
Yeah.
And so it's been really real for a lot of different people. And so we have been trying to cushion the blow with the Band-Aid. So when I first got in office, it was $0 put towards violence prevention, and to look at violence as a health approach to deal with the mental health that's prevalent in our community through trauma, and to deal with the substance abuse that's been prevalent in our community. And just to break down the Black family, we've never fully recovered from the crack epidemic that crippled Washington, D.C. And you see a lot of single-parent households. You see a lot of people and individuals that haven't gotten a high school diploma with a high dropout rate. We see that we had, prevalent schools that was flourishing, like trade schools that we no longer have in D.C., like Chamberlain. Phelps used to be one. And so we haven't done a good job of preparing people for careers. And it's Washington, D.C. We have a plethora of jobs and careers in this area, but we haven't done a good job of preparing people for those jobs. And so we opened up the Infrastructure Academy here in Ward 8.
Right.
We opened up, she helped support the Hope Project, was an IT training program here in Ward 8, and other programs like that in the city.
So we're just about out of time, but I know that you have been supportive of the violence interrupters and the work that they're doing. And, is there anything that you would like to call on the community to do in the last few minutes of this show, of this segment, to support your efforts?
I think that people are too calm. And because it don't affect everyone at one time directly, it affects us all indirectly in one form or fashion or another. And I think that the community has to get outraged. We have to take the streets back, because peace starts with self. And just because it wasn't your child that time, it could be your child the next time. Mm-hmm. And, somehow we become complacent as a community and just accepted the status quo that this is Southeast is going to be shootings or Southwest is going to be shootings. But this is somebody's nephew, this is somebody's grandson, somebody's granddaughter. And we all are part of the same community. So until we become outraged and galvanize, Dr. King said unity or non-existence. We have no other option. Unity or not, we got to unify now. The population in Washington, D.C. for African Americans have been shrinking from 78% to almost 48%. And the census is this year. So make sure you go take the census, but we may find that number is even lower. So the population is shrinking.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I want you to know you can always call on the Washington Informer News for a platform. If you've got a message you want to get out to the community, we want to be a partner with you in making sure that this community becomes one that we see as a great place and safe place to live. But, Tony, the other day I had someone ask me, white Jewish woman, who asked me, Denise, what can we do? Hey, brother, Denise, what can we do about the murders in Chicago? And I mean, I think it's a good question. I think it's an answer that we're all striving for, and I think it's one that you've been on the front lines of trying to get an answer to. So, how would you have answered her question, Tony? Either there or what we're experiencing right here in Southeast DC or in Prince George's County, the rise in gun violence.
Sure, I think we must have an economic plan to address this sort of culture of violence. We got to address. I think we got to eradicate poverty. We got to kill poverty in order to really get people in a place where hope is restored. And if we look specifically in Chicago, where the murders are happening, obviously here in the District of Columbia, and definitely specifically when we talk about Black communities, those are communities of poverty. And we have a great infrastructure here in terms of programming. We got the Office of Neighborhood Engagement and Safety. We got violence interrupters, and those people are doing their part. But the reality of it is, until we can create real systems where people can get to a point of family-sustaining employment, where lending can be in a situation where Black people can start thriving businesses and get contracts where they can hire Black people, we really got to really be so committed to doing this. And we haven't. Nowhere in America have we done that enough. And that's why we continue to see all this violence, in my opinion.
Do you think in any way where we are right now with this COVID pandemic, is that contributing? We lost you. Oh, there you are. Do you think that's contributing in any way to the violence that we're seeing right now, or is it not making a difference?
Is what contributing?
The COVID pandemic. Is that contributing in any way?
I would say, yeah. I think everybody's sort of more on edge than they would be under normal circumstances. I think we don't have any idea of the real mental health and the stress and the trauma that COVID is putting on our community, again, particularly Black communities. And so I would like to think that COVID definitely has some relation to the violence that we're seeing. I think what's also, very glaring is that the violence has not decreased in this pandemic. It's actually went up, particularly here in DC. And I think that should tell us something also, that people are that disconnected. People are in lifestyles and have a dependency on being outside for survival, that even a pandemic won't keep people inside. So again, I think it speaks back to the necessary focus on Black people and eradicate poverty. Because in DC, right, when it was just us here, if you will, right, and all of the problems were mainly us, it kind of made sense. But in 2020, it's no longer just us, but the problems still remain pretty much us. Mm-hmm. And when I say problems, I'm talking about incarceration, victims of violent crime, unemployment, homelessness, food insecurity, and all the other things you want to name, mental health. So I think it's time for us, I'm talking about particularly the native African-American Washingtonian, that there needs to be a conjoined effort. We need the business community to be a part of this, right? So it can't just be a social service effort, that collectively, government, private, nonprofit, faith-based, we create a comprehensive strategic plan to eradicate poverty in the Black community here in the District of Columbia. Until we've never seen a safe, poor community in America, and we won't. We want public safety without economic safety. And
well, how does that? I got you. Because I was just getting ready to ask. I mean, how do you juxtapose that to the call to defund police and which some think means eradicate or eliminate police? Sure. Where do you stand with that? And how do you think? I understand that there needs to be a balance, but what do you propose?
I think here in DC, right, I think it's okay to divest a little bit from MPD and put that money towards other public safety strategies that, in my mind, actually helps MPD. We don't have a shortage of police. So, and we've also seen that even with the police force that we have now, these violent incidents still continue to happen. Right. You're not going to lock away this issue. Right? You're not going to lock away this problem. We tried that before. We know that doesn't work. We obviously need MPD, but I think we need to invest in other interventions that can help increase public safety. So if that money can be directed into the right entities, if we can get more violence interrupters, if we can get more wraparound services and supports in these communities, and other things that provide hope, whether that's training, education, food support, healthier food, all of these things play a role in people's behavior, and people's attitudes, right? And people's motivation. So I think we got to really understand that money going somewhere else does not necessarily hurt MPD. I think it also is, in many ways, if we're smart about it, it can actually help MPD.
So we, unfortunately we run out of time, but I want to get you back on at some point, because one of the other concerns that I have is about education. And so many of these young people now with social distancing, we don't know what's going to happen in public schools, and kids are going to, even if, the age of some of the perpetrators have gotten younger, reportedly. And this is an age when they would be involved in some kind of academic, sports, whatever kinds of programs to keep them occupied in a positive way. Those are gone now, and we don't know what's going to happen as far as education is concerned. So I do want to get you back on as soon as possible to talk about that as well, and to find out, how we approach that, particularly in the coming months. August, normally school would open, and we just don't know what's going to happen. So I want to thank you so much. I don't know if I lost you already, but thank you for joining us there. I hear you, but I don't see you. But thank you, Tony, for being with us and to sharing your thoughts, which I think are critical, because we do need to find solutions because Black lives matter.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you back to the main event. We got Drake, we got Fila, we got Bears, oh my, and balloons may be illegal in VA. Here's the top trending topics of the area. Welcome to What's Going On. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you back to the main event. We got Drake, we got Fila, we got Bears, oh my, and balloons may be illegal in VA. Here's the top trending topics of the area. Welcome to What's Going On, DC. I'm your boy, the Media Prince. Let's get straight into it, shall we? First up, Howard University is making waves with the announcement of Nicole Hannah-Jones joining the university faculty to help the next generation of Black journalists like myself. But let's take a look to her epic announcement with Gayle King.
Well, I've decided to decline the offer of tenure. I will not be teaching on the faculty of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It's a very difficult decision, not a decision I wanted to make. And instead, I'm going to be the inaugural night chair in race and journalism at Howard University.
The Museum DC announces its upcoming collab with Fila. Yes, the Fila. Let's get excited, folks. This is an awesome new look for here in the city. In sports, the Washington football team was fined with a $10 million fine from the NFL. And Dan Snyder has stepped away from day-to-day operations after the misconduct investigation found the organization's workplace highly unprofessional, especially for women. The musicianship announces its virtual music camp from now until August 6th. It's free, and it's a program that will help teach all the tools for music. And this is all presented by Mayor Muriel Bowser. Hey Manassas, you may want to lock your doors and be on the lookout. Y'all got bears. Take a look.
Like we got pocket pants out here. Look, come on.
Big ups to recording artist DMV's own IDK and the amazing work he just brought to Capitol Heights with Project Kid. Take a look at this epic brother's philanthropy work.
Jason IDK Mills, in recognition of your visionary leadership and willingness to give back to the Prince George's County community, we are presenting this state's attorney citation to you. Congratulations. DMV's
own Brent Fires links up with the Sixth God. That's right. DMV has linked up with Toronto. Well, Brent and Drake's new single, Wasting Time, is out now everywhere. Now let's travel to 95. Hey, Baltimore, you got vaccine lottery winner amongst you guys. That's right, a Baltimore resident won $400,000 as a grand prize after not only taking the vaccine, but being entered in the lottery for doing so. Speaking of 95, the Museum DC, Don't Mute DC, and Check It Enterprises presents 95 Live Festival, August 14th and 15th. The festival will connect sister cities Baltimore, Philly, VA, DC, and New York through food, music, fashion, and culture. This is something you don't want to miss. It's the first of its kind. DMV's own Little Mo graces the cover of DMV's own Revo magazine. Take a look.
No clothes, beautiful rose when she's striking a pose, ballerina on the toes, reaching the goal.
Well, starting July 1st, it will be illegal to intentionally release balloons in Virginia, with a fine of $25 being the verdict, right? That means no letting balloons go for rest in peace, memorials, visuals, celebrations, graduations, nada. And get this, if a person under the age of 16 releases balloons at the instruction of an adult, then the adult shall be liable. Well then, no more balloons in VA. Lastly, DMV's own Quinn Cook announces the 5th annual basketball camp, August 16th through 20th in Springfield, VA at the St. James for ages 6 to 17. You get details now at quinncookbasketball.com. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another week of what's going on in DC. For all this and more, head over to wibridgedc.com and make sure you're subscribing to our YouTube because we don't want you to miss out on everything happening in the area. And make sure you follow the hashtags WGODC and WIBridgeTMP style for all your latest looks. Well, until next time, we are out. Have a safe weekend.
Sounds of the DMV, the bridge, Washington Informer. We here on Southeast, MLK, DC. Y'all know what it is. I go by the name of Aline Bilal. Water with Love is available now. Elu. Yo, whoa, whoa. Don't judge my grind. You don't know how long it took me. Talking numbers, well done deal like some cooked meat. Don't trail behind. Had to bring them up to foot speed. My shit don't age. It remind me of some good jeans. So mature. It remind me of some good green. No, these ain't 20s. Young nigga, but they look clean. I put it out. It came right back just like a good fiend. Can you imagine? They step on me now, that's a good dream. Staying down. The loyalty will turn to good things. These niggas clowns. They remind me of a good meme. They was around, but I always been a mook mean. Sink or swim, one or the other, only two things. You thought that I'd be gone, thought that I'd be lost. Made it through the forest fall, dark side of the car. The condoner, the forgiver, that was Al-Ghafar. The restorer and the giver, that was Al-Wahhab. You thought I wasn't gonna get my ish together, huh? You thought I wasn't gonna switch it up and change the weather, huh? Thought I wasn't gonna get it in bulk and sell the extra, huh? Every day we had to struggle, no Nadeska, huh? Checking bystanders who had us messed up. Didn't hold on to feelings we couldn't fester. We lost some good people, I pray you rest up. And this is not no loving hip-hop, baby, I'm way fresher. Don't judge my grind, you don't know how long it took me. Talking numbers, well done deal like some cooked meat. Don't trail behind, had to bring them up to foot speed. My shit don't age, it remind me of some good jeans. I'm so mature, it remind me of some good green. And these ain't 20s, young nigga, but they look clean. I put it out, it came right back just like a good fiend. Can you imagine? Elo, Aline Bilal, Water with Love. Just good parenting, being able to distinguish right from wrong, coming out the house realizing how blessed I was, and you know what I had to do and on my part, which is put the love I got back in, because everybody wasn't watered correctly. You know what I'm saying? All the plants, which are humans, wasn't watered correctly. So I just named it that because we all the same, and some trees don't grow straight up because of the sunlight, because of the water, but we all water with some type of love. You know? The music scene has affected my music in a way of where I've seen you got to be able to make room for the old, out with the old and in with the new, in a sense. Like the old you has to leave, and sometimes you got to bring a newer version of you, a better version of you, and you know, still be competitive. Like I'm 33, I'm happy to say it, you know, but surviving through a couple decades, close to a couple decades of this DMV music scene, just seeing the maturity and the things you have to own up to as a person, as a man, and put it back into your music so people could just know that you being your most authentic self. Yeah, my album, Water with Love, that came out May the 21st, 5/21/21. Of course, ELU Volume 1 and 2 is out. Reinvention, I got a couple projects out, mixtapes, but this is my first debut album. It's personal, it's intimate, so yeah, check it out. I produced for a bunch of other cats out here, got some stuff coming out, but right now, Water with Love, let's get it. Yeah, my social media is ABThePro_ELU, ABTHEPRO_EALU.